seeing, sa, madhyama, slender-waisted Rukmini, savridam, shyly, aikshat, looked, tat, his, bhaktram, at the face, bhaya, with fear, vivala, disturbed, lochana, whose eyes. And the translation for text 4 is as follows. Slender-waisted Rukmini, seeing her lord's army covered by torrents of arrows, shyly looked at his face with fear-stricken eyes. And text 5. Prahasya Bhagavan aha masma bahirya vamalochane vinangshyati aruna vaitat tavakai satravam balam. And the translation for text 5. In response, the Lord laughed and assured her, "Do not be afraid, beautiful-eyed one. This enemy force is about to be destroyed by your soldiers." Purport by the BBT. To express his great affection for Rukmini, Lord Krishna gallantly referred to his own Yadava army as, quote, "your men," close quote, indicating that the Lord's entire dynasty was now the property of his beloved queen. The Supreme Lord Krishna desires to share his blissful opulence with all living beings, and thus he sincerely invites them to come back home, back to Godhead. The Krishna consciousness movement, introduced throughout the world by Srila Prabhupada on the order of his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who himself preached all over India on the order of his exalted father, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, is broadcasting the loving message of Lord Krishna. Remember him, serve him, return to him, and share in the infinite beauty of the kingdom of God. Om Jnana-timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandho Jagat Pate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapsa Kanchana Gaurangi Radha Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpataribhyascha Kripa Sindhubhe Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnebhyo Namo Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimataram Padaswami Iti Namine Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimata Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nivishesha Sunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Asadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. In this class, I'm going to backtrack a little bit to the previous text because it leads into this. Somehow I found it easier to do it that way. So that previous text was mounted on the backs of horses, the shoulders of elephants, and the seats of chariots. The enemy kings, expert with weapons, rained down arrows upon the Yadus, like clouds pouring rain on mountains, and that leads into our verses today. Slender-waisted Rukmini, seen her lord's army covered by torrents of arrows, shyly looked at his face with fear-stricken eyes, and then in response, Lord Krishna laughed and assured her, "Do not be afraid, beautiful-eyed one. This enemy force is about to be destroyed by your soldiers." So there's a simile made that these were the words: "The enemy kings, expert with weapons, rain down arrows upon the Yadus, like clouds pouring rain on mountains." So Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he comments that the shower of Jarasanda's arrows was totally insignificant, exactly like rain falling on mountains, or like rain falling on mountains. That's a simile. So this assessment by Srila Vishwanath, it highlights particularly the unfortunate aspect of King Jarasandha and the other enemy kings. Just the fact that he's referring to this huge shower of arrows as being insignificant, just like rain falling on a mountain. So there's a protocol for kings, and it reads like this: assertive and enterprising actions carried out by those who are careless, inconsistent, or unfortunate cannot succeed. So this is a protocol that applies to kings. I'm drawing from a compilation of different protocols for kings from a book entitled The Way of Kings. So I'm particularly noting that this unfortunate aspect of these kings, because that's what Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is sort of indicating, regarding their actions as insignificant. So the unfortunate aspect for Jarasandha is that Krishna had already a plan for Jarasandha. And he stated that plan at the time when he saw Jarasandha surrounding his Krishna city. So this is the description that's given. Jarasandha's assembled army surrounding his city like a great ocean overflowing the shores. So this was Lord Krishna's thought at that time when he saw Jarasandha with this immense army surrounding his city of Mathura. So this is Lord Krishna's thought. Since it is such a burden on the earth, I will destroy Jarasandha's army, consisting of Akshinis, of foot soldiers, horses, chariots, and elephants, which the king of Magda has assembled from all subservient kings and brought together here. So that was Krishna's assessment of it. Basically the reason it's overflowing, almost like an ocean overflowing its shores, is that Jarasandha had actually assembled armies from subservient kings. So there's a huge army out there. And what was Krishna's plan? I'm going to destroy this army of Jarasandha because it's a burden on the earth. So Jarasandha himself should not be killed. This was Krishna's thought, since in the future he will certainly assemble another army. So Krishna's going to take advantage of this tendency that Jarasandha has to keep coming to try and attack him and his city. So the explanation given for Krishna's plan from the BBT purport that is at this moment where Jarasandha is attempting to attack Mathura is like this, that Lord Krishna decided that since he had descended to earth, particularly to destroy the demons, and since Jarasandha was so enthusiastic to bring all the demons to the Lord's front door, it was more efficient to keep Jarasandha alive and busy. So Krishna is going to take advantage of Jarasandha's busyness. So that was from the 50th chapter, the 10th canto. Thus it was that Jarasandha, the king of Magda, met defeat. Krishna had made that plan. So throughout these defeats, the description is that, and this is how it's said, he fought on with his Aukshini divisions against the forces of the Yadu dynasty, who were protected by Lord Krishna. So note, the emphasis is made that the enemy for Jarasandha was the Yadus, but the Yadus were protected by Krishna. So each time the Yadus destroyed his army, and the king, released by his enemies, would go away again. So notice, the armies would be destroyed. The only person left standing would be King Jarasandha, but they would release him. They didn't, behead him, kill him. They just released him, because that was Krishna's plan. So although his actions were assertive and enterprising, I mean, he'd put a lot of work into it. Because he was unfortunate, those actions did not succeed. So the thinking of Jarasandha indicates wherein lay his misfortune. And it's expressed when he saw Krishna and Balaram. And this was after Krishna. So Jarasandha had endured his many defeats 17 times, and just on the 18th time, there was an opposing king coming too. So Krishna decided he was actually going to take all the residents of Mathura and in a newly construct a new city, Dwarka, within the ocean, and so keep the residents safe, because he feared that if he got engaged with the other enemy king, Jarasandha could possibly imprison or kill the residents of Mathura. So at that moment, when it's going to be the 18th time, Jarasandha is facing Krishna and Balaram, and this is what he says, and here you get an idea of how unfortunate he is. Jarasandha says, "O Krishna, lowest of men, I do not wish to fight alone with you, since I would be ashamed to fight with a mere boy. You fool who keep yourself hidden, O murderer of your relatives, go away. I will not fight with you." So that was, again, from the 50th chapter of this canto. So the truth of the matter is that, and this is articulated by Sridhar Swami, quoted in the BBT purport, Krishna is actually the best of all living beings. And Jarasandha would not fight with Krishna, for Krishna is actually a great personality to whom all others are inferior. And Krishna's child is Brahma, and for Brahma, Lord Krishna is the Lord of all lords. And in fact, Jarasandha is ashamed to fight with the Lord because he has lived a sinful life and is unqualified. That's the truth of the matter. And in terms of Jarasandha's accusation that he's calling Krishna, "You fool, you keep yourself hidden," the truth of the matter is Krishna is hidden in everyone's heart and is therefore invisible to material vision. So this invisibility of Krishna in particular to those with material vision, and that's King Jarasandha, and as part of his misfortune, it's stated by Krishna himself. And Krishna says, "Aham Atma Gudakesha sarva bhutasaya stitaha aham adischa madhyamcha bhutanam anta evacha. I am the super soul, O Arjuna, seated in the hearts of all living entities. I am the beginning, the middle, and the end of all beings. That's Bhagavad Gita 10:20. So particularly applicable to King Jarasandha is Srila Prabhupada's commenting on this statement of Krishna. And this is what Srila Prabhupada says. For those who are sleeping in the darkness of ignorance, it is not possible to understand how the Supreme Personality of Godhead manifests himself in various ways in the material and spiritual worlds. So that's Srila Prabhupada commenting, and it's applicable to King Jarasandha, this sleeping in the darkness of ignorance. So for Arjuna, for instance, because that's whom the statement was made to by Krishna, that he's the super soul and he's seated in the hearts of every living being, and he's the beginning, the middle, and the end of all beings. Arjuna was obviously beyond this darkness of ignorance. He'd surpassed that. So he was in fact being told by Krishna of how he needed to think of Krishna. And in particular, he needed to think of Krishna as the three forms of Paramatma in charge of creation, maintenance, and destruction. Because these forms of Krishna as Paramatma, they all have vibhutis or opulences, they have knowledge and bliss. And they're situated within an abode consisting of all the elements. So each one of these Paramatma expansions of Krishna. So to explain this more simply, Srila Prabhupada explains that before the material creation, by his full and complete expansion, Krishna accepts the Purusha, the enjoyer form, and so from him everything begins. So he's the soul of the universe, the universal elements. And Mahavishnu, in that expansion form, Mahavishnu, he enters into the Mahatattva, the total material energy, and he's the soul. So that's the one Paramatma form. And when Mahavishnu enters into the manifested universes, he again manifests himself as a super soul in each and every living entity. So another expansion. In particular, he's situated in the individual person in the form of Kshirodakshayi Vishnu. So he's actually dwelling within all individual jivas. So that was that from the verse, the Sarva Bhuta, Sarva Bhutasya Stitaha. So that was how Arjuna was told to think of Krishna. And so I'm expanding a little bit on Jarasandha's statement that Krishna is invisible. I'm expanding, indeed he is, but one would have to have an understanding to be able to understand that actually he is present even in Jarasandha, in this in the individual as Kshirodakshayi Vishnu, inhabiting the heart of all living entities, including Jarasandha. So Krishna is a great personality to whom all others are inferior, and because that was the countering Jarasandha's view of Krishna, he was actually seeing him as not even worthwhile fighting. The truth of the matter, as I'd mentioned, is contended by Sridhar Swami, is that Krishna is a great personality and everyone else is inferior. And there's a nice argument that's made by Maharaj Prithu that says how this is the case. And this is from Srimad Bhagavatam, the 21st chapter of the 4th canto. And this is how Maharaj Prithu argues. And he's addressing his citizens, on this point that Krishna is such a great personality. My dear respectable ladies and gentlemen, according to the authoritative statements of Shastra, there must be a supreme authority who's able to reward the respective benefits of our previous activities. Otherwise, why should there be persons who are unusually beautiful and powerful, both in this life and the life after death? So that's his argument. The very existence of Krishna is borne out by the fact that there has to be somebody who's bestowing everybody with their particular deserved, the fruits of their actions. There has to be a supreme authority who's dishing that out, so to speak. Because how else would you see that a particular person, so this is of course looking from a very distant viewpoint, that a particular person is extraordinarily beautiful, extraordinarily powerful in one life, and the same in the next life. So it means the actions in the one life led to the person being in that kind of position again in the next life. So there has to be somebody who's dispensing the fruits of their actions. So this reasoning was meant to address those who were not atheists. So this is Maharaj Prithu speaking to all his citizens. And Srila Prabhupada explains that in particular atheists, or those not believing in the existence of God, understand everything that is happening in their daily affairs to be due to physical arrangements and chance. So, you hear people saying, oh, that was so lucky. But it's not like that. For atheists, the belief is Sankhya philosophy, and the belief on the part of the atheist is that there's a combination of prakrit and purusha, so enjoyer and material nature. So matter under certain conditions amalgamates and gives rise to the living force, and so varieties of material forms become manifest. So that's the belief of materialistic, atheistic persons, that it's just a combination of an enjoying something and material nature, and somehow the living forms come about. But Maharaj Prithu, he wanted his citizens to become aware of the formula whereby Krishna as the greatest personality is highlighted. So there's some understanding of this that comes through Bhagavad Gita, because in 1846 the statement is there, by worship of the Lord, who is the source of all beings and who is all-pervading, man can, in the performance of his own duty, attain perfection. So that's yata pravritir bhutanam, yana sarsham idam tatam, svakarmana tam abhyavarcha, siddhim vrindati manavaha. So this indicates Krishna is the original source of everything. Aham sarvasya prabhava. And he's the original cause of all emanations, and at the same time, he's Paramatma. So he is spread all over the universe, all over existence. And the reasoning is like this. The absolute truth is therefore the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and every living being is meant to satisfy the Supreme Godhead by performing his respective duty. So that's the particular formula that King Prithu was trying to communicate to his citizens. And it's all to do with this particular point that Krishna is just that great personality. And one can actually make that connection with him by understanding that actually, as a living being, one's meant to satisfy that great personality by performing one's respective duty. So you can sort of start to get a sense of how distant King Jarasandha was from this kind of understanding, because I'm highlighting how unfortunate he was. And on his part, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the chief of all living entities. So Srila Prabhupada states it this way: he has no need to derive benefit by interfering with the affairs of other living entities. But because he's the maintainer of all, he has the right to bring them to the proper standards so that all living entities may become happy. So very interesting. It's not that Krishna is going to be interfering in anyone's life. He doesn't have that kind of self-interest. But because he's maintaining everyone, he's the chief living entity, he actually wants to help to uplift everyone so that they actually can become happy. So that's actually Krishna's motivation. And in the current circumstance, we hear that the opposing princes were determined to defeat Krishna and recapture Rukmini from his custody, and they fought with him as severely as possible. So, you can understand how distant they are from this understanding of, how you're actually supposed to be performing your duty, who is the chief living entity. And that chief living entity is, in fact, the source of all beings. And he's all-pervading. So they're choosing to fight with him as severely as possible. So that's when we come to hear the verse for today, that Rukmini, seated by the side of Krishna, she saw the arrows raining down from the opposing army onto the faces of the Yadu soldiers. So that's what she witnessed. She just saw, all those arrows coming down onto the faces of the Yadu soldiers. So her attitude was fearful. And she looked upon Krishna's face, expressing her gratefulness that he had taken such a great risk for her sake only. So there's fearfulness, but at the same time, when she does sort of very shyly look at Krishna, she's expressing her gratefulness. Because, she's understanding it was Krishna's going to have to stand up to all these opposing kings. And in the writing of Srila Prabhupada puts it this way: her eyes moving, she appeared sorry, and Krishna, who could immediately understand her mind, encouraged her with these words: "My dear Rukmini, don't worry. Please rest assured that the soldiers of the Yadu dynasty will kill all the opposing soldiers without delay." So that's from Krishna book. And we're reading that Rukmini shyly glanced at Krishna's face. That's and Srila Vishwanath, that's his one-line commentary on this verse for today. And in the next text, which is, in response, the Lord laughed and assured her, "Do not be afraid, beautiful-eyed one. This enemy force is about to be destroyed by your soldiers." Srila Vishwanath gives this commentary. He says, Krishna laughingly said, and these were his words, "You need not fear, Master Fire," that was in the text, "because your army will defeat the enemy." So to express his great affection for Rukmini, Krishna gallantly referred to his own Yadava army as your men. Noticing, or it indicates that Krishna's entire dynasty was now the property of his beloved queen. So it's such a contrast, Krishna sheltering Rukmini and even extending his opulence to her, that she now was co-possessor of that opulence, particularly his army. And so one can see the great difference that's there in the dealing with the enemy kings and King Jarasandha, who are so far distant from this understanding of what Krishna's actual position is. And then and of course that he's also acting in a way towards them that will actually help to uplift them through destroying them. And for somebody who has the correct understanding of Krishna, such as Rukmini, Krishna extends all his opulence to her. So these are some thoughts on these two simple verses. If there's any comment or further exploration of the topic.
There's few very nice points that captured my attention. One is the part of the incapacity of conditioned souls to be able to recognize Krishna as the supreme person, and thus understanding that one's happiness is in connection to that principle that he is our maintainer, he's our protector, like that. And then there's a part that you mentioned Kim Pritu's point that just by observing, then one can come to that conclusion. There's a supreme, and then you can see that not only Kim Pritu using this common sense, that anyone that applies intelligence into just observing the cosmic manifestation can come to that conclusion by common sense. In the case of Kim Pritu, he's saying that, that just by understanding, what was the point?
His particular argument is that when you observe, there has to be somebody who's a supreme authority that's dispensing basically
the good karma. Basically, when you see someone beautiful, when you see someone rich, just by the fact that there is these differences, this person received these benefits, this person is suffering because they have nothing. So there have to be someone who dispenses that. So that's one point of view, and or that's one aspect. We hear about Newton saying about the order in the universe, how planets move, how there's perfect order, so there must be intelligence, supreme intelligence behind. So the counterpart of that is that, it's so really inconceivable to think of a personality who have the capacity and the powers of Krishna. In terms of, you mentioned, he's not only the source of everything, but he spans into everything. Krishna says that in the Gita. Behold my mystic powers, and that although I am in everything, I'm not in everything. I'm separated. So it's so inconceivable, and then you go to another inconceivable thing to explain the universe, which is chance. So everything happens by chance. So it's either accepting Krishna or accepting that things happen just, you throw something and then boom, it falls down into a whole creation just by chance. So, which is quite inconceivable too. But you have to choose something to explain. And I think this propensity of thinking that things are happening just by, not by intelligence, not by design, but by chance, is quite, a very, how would you say, not very stable. It's very, and then anxiety and fear. And we can see that sometimes in these reactions that one has of, seeing this whole wave of arrows coming at one, and then one's become bewildered and afraid and trying to figure it out. In the case of Rukmini, she just looked up to Krishna, and then everything gets reaffirmed and, like that. So I think this thing of seeing chance or, Krishna, both are inconceivable, but in one sense, just to apply common sense, it cannot be, the chance doesn't make any sense. To have a supreme being, then now that makes more sense, because you see how there have to be some intelligence, some control, some design, just by the sheer mass of just things that we can observe and measure. Know that they have to be. So I was just going to comment on that. And
thank you that you were reflecting on the points that were made, and particularly highlighting the one that there has to be a choice that's made between viewing through observation and coming to understand that because of the order, the different dispensation of benefits or suffering to different living entities, there has to be some sort of supreme authority who's dispensing either the, particularly the benefits. That's what Maharaj Prithu was highlighting. And then the other side, where one is actually thinking that everything's happening by chance. You just don't know what's going to come your way. It could be good, it could be bad. It's just really how circumstances or material energies moving that's going to dictate things. It's a very interesting thing, because like recently I got exposed to somebody communicating to me that the concern was with seeing, people being unfortunate and, having disabilities or particularly that. And also this idea that there has to be justice. So this was the concern of the person, seeing that some persons are in some sort of disadvantaged condition, and surely there has to be justice. So that's, of course, somebody looking from a materialistic point of view, because from a materialistic point of view, you're going to think that other persons that are operating on a material way have somehow deprived those persons of some advantages in life, and therefore other people are responsible for the disadvantaged members of society. But that's a materialistic point of view, because it means that the justice isn't in order. You don't have your system, your social system properly organized, that there's an equal dispensation of advantage to every member of society. That's a materialistic point of view. So hence, there'll be discussion of, there has to be proper justice for persons who've had to go through some sort of suffering or inequity. And so the finger is pointing at a breakdown or an inadequately designed social system. And from the theistic point of view, the understanding is that there's perfect justice because there's a supreme authority. So in actual fact, every living entity is responsible for the condition they find themselves in. It means that previous life and previous actions are now bearing fruit. So it's the individual who has not functioned in recognition of the supreme authority that is taken on the burden of wanting to enjoy things or the results of particularly their performance of their duty, and that's what leads to the resultant reaction. So there is a perfect justice system, but one has to make that choice to actually hear about the existence of that supreme authority and what the position is of that supreme authority and how it actually plays itself out. And I think that's why it's so interesting. You can have that very broad perspective that Krishna gives to Arjuna of how you can understand him, just understanding that he's expanding, like right from the beginning, he's taking a gigantic form of Mahavishnu. And then he's expanding himself into all the material elements through actually entering into them as Paramatma, so in some minute form, but he's in every element. And then on top of it, the living beings that created, he's also entered into the living beings as Paramatma. So, one can think of him in this way as that spiritual spark, so to speak, but particularly as Kshirodakshai Vishnu in living entities. So he's fully present, but one has to hear about that and come to think more deeply about it, come to actually start acting in that consciousness, to start experiencing it. So, one can be sympathetic to a person who's saying, oh, there's injustice in the world, the social system doesn't work well, there's disadvantaged persons. But then one can actually say, but you have to actually consider the point of how persons are performing duties, in what consciousness they're performing duties, and the responsibility that they then have to undergo the particular enjoyments and sufferings based on that consciousness that, they, the enjoyers, because that's a materialistic view. There's just material energy to work with and oneself as the enjoyer. It's just that simple. But then, you have to expand your consciousness to try and understand that actually there's a supreme authority, a supreme enjoyer, and one is beholden to that supreme authority because actually he's maintaining one. So it's such a broadened view of the world, and it really requires a certain a willingness to hear something contrary to one's own narrow views, which one may think are so broad because one is calling for justice in the world. So one considers oneself so liberal because one is observing suffering and one is thinking what can be done about it. There must be justice that's done. But in actual fact, the justice has already been dispensed appropriately. because the persons undertook that responsibility on an individual level to perform their actions disregarding the supreme authority. So, I mean, it's not that it's punitive, but it means just you've taken on that responsibility of bearing that whole weight yourself. So, yeah. I'm commenting because I got exposed to this argument recently.
It's a hot topic.
Yes, I
But,
understand.
I mean, for the one thing is that you have also, indeed, there's karma, and people with transcendental knowledge understands about karma. But there's also the duties that leaders of society have to provide all facilities, and and a fair and a just, according to religious principles, to provide a proper facilities and protection for all people.
Yes.
To live a peaceful life regardless of their karma or situation. You may be poor, you may be rich, you may be this, you may be that, but you're protected. So when governments or when leaders of society fail to give that type of protection, then also, you see the disarray. So it's a whole failure of society to comply to the supreme authority.
Thank you for expanding the point being made that indeed there's also the role that leaders in society have to play that's also not caught up in some sort of materialistic view, but rather a very expanded view that their role is one of protection and protecting all citizens in whatever condition and whatever the karma is of the particular individuals, making arrangements that every member of society has the proper arrangement to progress in terms of their consciousness. So yeah, it's quite a challenging new model that, and I think that's why the purport here on the second verse was particularly focusing on the expansion of the Krishna consciousness movement. I've tried to go very much behind the scenes, so to speak, but the particular purport is talking about the expansion of the Krishna consciousness movement. So you can see the importance to actually bring about general happiness in society. So, indeed, it's a very broad topic, and indeed, it's. I didn't mean to be facetious in any way through, speaking about the argument for justice, but from the point of view of just the theistic view, it is necessary to mention that there is already supreme justice. Yeah. So, of course, I'm taking a sort of distant view and not wishing to be facetious in any way of whatever ills in society. There are also being related to leaders of society not having the theistic view. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.